Well, welcome back to podcast number 4 with the PPDM group here for why data management is still important. We are really glad that you are here joining us for this fourth installment. We would like to encourage you, though, if this is your first time visiting with us, to go back and listen to the first 3 podcasts in this series, and then come back and join us for what we're going to be talking about today around the unfashionable truths related to data management. I'm really, really excited about this topic. I think we're going to dig into some of we talked about the myths, we talked about the challenges, we talked about the role of digital technology, and now we're going to get into these truths and how they matter and what we can be doing to leverage these going forward. As always, I'm joined by our 3 wise guys, John Jacobs, Tim Coburn, and Jim Crompton. Guys, thank you again for being with us today.
You're welcome.
With that, I want to just jump right into this one. We know that people have been enjoying listening to you guys, so I'm going to stop talking and just let you guys get into this. So let's really start with the first issue here. That when we talk about unfashionable truths when it comes to data, I think one of the most common things we run into is this idea that data is still mostly being handled in silos in a lot of the companies that we all interact with, and so therefore, the data moving around can cause a lot of problems that then ultimately results in various experts actually having to come in to fix that data to truly make it useful for people to get any insight or get any guidance from it. So I really wanted to start off by just letting you guys talk about what you've seen in that regard when it comes to these silos, those challenges, and maybe what are some of the ways that we can get around and get out of these silos that we see when it comes to data management. And Jim, I'm going to let you start off first on this one.
Okay, well, thanks, and I'm glad to be back. A number of years ago at a conference, I actually gave a talk called "In Defense of Silos" because you kept hearing about it, and the high tech, kind of salesmen were coming in and blaming the industry about that we were the problem. There's really actually a practical reason why we have managed data in these functional disciplinary areas or geographic areas. And it's because it's intuitive, it's natural, it fits our work processes and it fits our tools. I mean, when the drillers, manage data from drilling a new well, or they're getting an analog well in order to build their next well plan, it fits because the data they need to do that is largely in a drilling functional area. Some subsurface geoscience, of course, that's part of that. But the silo way grew up, and it's strong, and it's hard to kind of throw it away because it's a very natural and effective way to begin the process of managing data. Now, I want to emphasize there the begin the process. I mean, if you start in silos and stop in silos, then you've got a big problem because silos don't have very many doors and windows to allow. I think, in my view, it's okay to manage data in silos at the beginning of your process, but that you can't stop there. You need to get to, master data glossaries or some of the different digital platform technologies that allow you to make sure that data is transparent and understandable and shareable through a workflow kind of context. And so stopping at silos to me is what our problem is. And I think, getting back to our title, Unfashionable Truths, it's the fact that most of our companies will go, have an executive go to a conference and say, "Oh, we've solved this. We're using all this data analytics to solve all these things, et cetera," and we get data across our whole company. Well, that's the unfashionable truth, because that's not raw. The reality is we're still stuck in these functional silos, and it's difficult, and it costs people productivity, lots of time spent trying to get data from one silo to another.
Yeah, so I think this has been a problem over the years. as Jim has alluded to, this is nothing new, and I do think that he's correct about that. There is a sort of a generic functionality that we're all used to. Engineers like to work with engineers, and geologists like to work with geologists, and accountants like to work with accountants. It kind of goes like that. Still, in today's environment of big data, like we've talked about in the past, and lots of different kinds of data coming in order for these kinds of things to kind of work, we have to find a strategy to get beyond the silos so we can share data and be transparent. I don't think it's so bad that we have the silos per se, because we're all going to still do engineering and do geology. The issue is whether we're able to share material and information and data with each other, and if we're willing to do that. And I think this lack of willingness is what sort of throws up the barriers that we see. Now, the barriers exist because if my organization pays to collect a set of data, we kind of feel like we own it. It becomes ours, and we don't want to give it to somebody else because they might corrupt it in some way. You know, that's the kind of thinking I think that gets us in trouble in the kinds of areas that we work on.
So then, this is going to be a bit of a loaded follow-up question, but is this a good way where data managers can play a role to help bridge maybe where you still keep the silos in place to an extent, back to to your point earlier, Tim, around there's just certain data and certain types of activities that are going to belong to the geologists versus the accountants. But is this an opportunity where like that data manager role can come in to help bridge that gap and start to facilitate a bit more data sharing and to help build that trust across those different silos, if you will?
Yeah, I'll jump back in and I'll let the other guys talk here. Yes, I think the data manager has to assume a different kind of role in today's environment. That data manager, and there are other titles for this individual, somebody kind of at the hub of the whole operation, the center, so that the spokes coming out of that kind of can connect across that hub in some way. So that person needs to know something about geology, something about engineering, something about accounting and finance, something about refining if you have an downstream focus as well. So that person needs to know a little bit more than just digits and IT, CPU kinds of things. There has to be some domain knowledge there, so that if I'm in the center, I can go talk to somebody, and I can be that bridge. I can be that segue back and forth across those various disciplines.
Yeah, I mean, to give I guess, a slightly different perspective. I mean, way back, the silos were worse. I think we've done a pretty good job punching holes through a lot of the silos in the industry. It doesn't mean that you still don't have issues with this. And I think what Tim said, especially around the individual wanting to hold on to their own data, this is one of the key things. It's not even about the engineers. Sometimes it's about a engineer. And not to pick on the engineers, but one of the things in almost every one of the old companies I've worked with and worked for, there was usually one guy in a particular area of engineering who usually had the spreadsheet that everybody depended on. And everybody went to that guy to get information because he was the one that was the keeper of the keys. That's a pretty bad silo. That's something that probably should have been shared out. And this is where you get issues when someone like that decides they're going to retire and leave the company, and nobody understands how he was maintaining this or what the basis of it was. And that's probably even a worst case scenario. But I think overall, a lot of the work that we've done, especially in the data management side, on master data, on standards, on things like what is a well and what is a completion that PPDM has done, these have gone a long way to break down a lot of the barriers across some of the disciplines. And, I think that's an area that needs to continue. But to Tim's point, the data manager really needs to have their, if you want to call them that, they need to have their hands on the pulse across the whole data flow. They have to understand what is unique in each one of these areas, in each one of these disciplines, but they even more importantly need to understand what they share in common and what the impacts are. I mean, you're looking at a fairly complex data flow. It doesn't just go one way. It can start in engineering and move into geology and back into engineering and into geophysics and back to engineering. It's not a one directional process. So you've got to have someone that understands that kind of a flow process and understands what's unique and what is commonly used and has to be maintained in that sense as a core masterpiece of information.
Yeah, I take that even one step further. They've also need to have that authority to deal with the problems that they find or the challenges that come up, right? I think that's
Oh,
the other,
absolutely. Absolutely.
Those
because
are all great points.
yeah, and because I think you guys are spot on just as far as we've seen some good acknowledgement around the silos that are there and sort of punching through those. And in fact, one of the things that you're starting to see a lot of, and we've been seeing it for the last few years in a lot of the major oil companies, is this idea of evolving data management communities, right? Where now you've got these communities of folks, these group of folks who are seeing sort of that bigger picture, that data flow that you talked about, John, around how does that data flow from one point to the other and possibly flow back to the beginning, as well as maybe almost like a hub and spoke where it branches out into other areas. I think where the concern that I know a lot of us still see is, while it's facilitating a lot of good conversations and it's helping people maybe to see how their data is being leveraged downstream and upstream from them. What I get worried about is our data managers, or more importantly, maybe that role and function maybe being a bit forgotten, because in the last few years we've seen companies restructure and reshape. It seems like the data managers and those roles are some of the first to go. What are you guys' thoughts on that, and how does that affect some of what we've been talking about as far as how we deal with some of this?
Well, if I could jump in here, I think all three of us are pretty well aligned, and pointing towards the importance of a new role of data managers in the community, certainly aspect that. I think if we go back into our traditional world, the data manager was a servant of a function, or maybe in John's case, that nasty individual engineer who kept all the data to himself. I mean, information is power. And so where is the power? Is the power at an individual? Is it, head of engineering? Is it the drilling manager or something? In that case, the data managers really served a specific purpose. And yes, they had a lot of knowledge and domain, but it was limited to that ownership, again, that Tim talked about, that we kind of have with regard to these things. If we're going to evolve to a place where we're really going to be data driven and analytics is going to be more important to help us define better efficiencies in our operations and gain new insights, that information is power has to be raised up to an enterprise level. The data is a enterprise asset. I think we're unfortunately, a lot of the impact of the last 10 years, there's been at least two major commodity price declines, and those have affected staff in a negative way, and they've affected data management particularly, is having to make deep cuts in certain places. But we gotta correct that. I mean, and if the data management groups can come back, that that information as power should be held at a higher level, at an enterprise level. That's the one that'll have the authority, the governance, the ability to see the big, broader perspective, the complex workflows, multidisciplinary sort of workflows, often multi-organizational workflows that get to that. And you see a few companies that kind of at the same time they're cutting their data management staff, they're creating a new job called chief data officer, right? Well, that chief data officer should have that authority and that perspective to drive this thing from an enterprise perspective. But if you gutted her staff, and you've not allowed the right kind of experience and understanding of standards and the all the good things that are out there that we could do a better job punching holes in windows into the silos and creating horizontal work processes. In a sense, the unfashionable truth is there's some good and there's some not so good in the actions of the industry over the last decade. While we have made progress, we've also taken steps back with regard to, our, forgetting about data management. I mean, we could even talk about mergers and acquisitions where those frequently are data managers' nightmares because all the progress in company A and all the progress in company B, which is probably different progress, they can get eliminated or forgotten or put back to square one by the actions of the just exactly how the merger is actually puts the two entities together.
The very worst situation in silos that I've ever witnessed, and I think it still happens today, is that the data manager who's in the data management role within the organization loses a job, but that responsibility is then parsed off to the individual groups, and they have their own data managers who don't talk to each other. I think that is the unfashionable truth about what happens lots of times, and we end up with a silo with its own data management organization that don't talk to across the boundaries. I don't know how to resolve that honestly. I think it does take some authority from the top and some direction from the top, from someone who actually knows how the data across their organization flows. But in a lot of cases, we don't have that role.
Well, and just to dig into that a little bit more, Tim. So, because I actually get this question a lot, when you're talking around sort of that role, that data manager role, right? And the example you just gave, I think is a good way to dig into that, explore that a little bit more. Where you said, that person or that group gets let go, and then suddenly it's left to like the operational functions to absorb that into their into their daily tasks. And so this question that comes up a lot is, should it be a separate role, or should those activities that make up data management be a separate role, or should it actually be somehow merged into someone's existing role, or a group's existing role within those operational functions and those business units? What are your guys' thoughts on that?
My response is it's really hard to operate in that environment. Honestly, I've done that, and that makes it more difficult, particularly if you don't have if you have a great working relationship with the other guy on the other side. You both know how to talk to each other about it. It works, but honestly, I've seen it not work more times than it has. Maybe John has a better idea from Anadarko's perspective. Maybe Jim can talk about Chevron. I don't know. That's my perspective.
Well, I can tell you, and if you look at what is good governance practices, data management isn't done as a separate function. It's not isolated. If you've got good governances, you're talking about everyone in the company being a part of the process. It's not just a particular group or a particular individual who understands. It's about educating the whole company, the whole industry about how this information is used and flows, because everyone has to be involved. If you're not providing your perspective and you're going to get left out of this, you're more apt to go off and do your own thing, create your own silo. You need to be involved in the process. Everyone needs to be involved in the process. Whether your title has got data management in it or not, you are managing data. If you touch it, you're managing it. So, I mean, to a large extent, I think just good data governance requires this not be isolated. And when you break it down into functional areas who are isolated from each other, as Tim pointed out, that makes it even worse. At least having someone in sort of that hub position who sort of acts as the cop between all the groups and can resolve issues and can identify opportunities for improvements and for standards. You need that. But that doesn't mean he does it on his own. He has to be in communication, and he has to be involved with all of the people that are using the data.
I like how you said hub position on that. Because you know, a hub implies that it's connected to something bigger than itself, i.e., there's a foundation to it, right? So, and we talk about this all the time around there's a data management foundation, you know, being and really, I think that the challenge there is that, um, and I think John, you put it really succinctly. This is much more complex than I think a lot of folks want to acknowledge at times, right? Especially management, right? There's this idea with data management. You've got data quality issues. You've got all these different ways of data collection that are happening, whether they're formal or informal within the solutions. You've got spreadsheets. You guys talk about you've got that one person who is sort of the keeper of all the knowledge in a particular area, and God forbid they get hit by a bus, and suddenly, you know, that group's in a whole lot of trouble. And this just compounds it. And, you know, Jim, you mentioned it earlier around acquisitions and mergers. You know, as you start to bring those activities into this, that compounds all of these data management issues and that then the governance that's needed that ultimately needs that hub position. I really like how you put that. But Jim, I know you were going to say something around all this, but I wanted to kind of throw that spin in there of this is really growing, especially as we're seeing a lot more activity with these acquisitions and mergers as well.
Well, I think you led off with one of the unfashionable truths is that the data management is more complex than most people realize. You know, all the way from management to whoever's putting the new organization together after a merger to tech vendors to who think their tools could do it all to the individual engineer who's said, well, you know, this is simple. I could just do it on my spreadsheet. So I think where we're all pointing to is, and John said this very well, is data management now should be seen as a process, not a task. And maybe in our old siloed world, it was a task. A DBA could, you know, manage the rows and columns in this SQL database and make it more performant so you got queries faster. That's a task, and someone's got to do the task. But when you look at the importance of data, man, it is a process and it touches all. It or in I mean, not every process touches every person, but a process can touch lots of people, and some process will touch everyone. So if you look at it as a process, how do you manage a process? And that has always been an organizational challenge. You can try to do it in matrix organization or silo hierarchical organizations. I mean, uh, I don't know of a perfect organization that does process management really well. Most oil and gas companies do not. So I don't think the answer is, you know, use this org chart or have this position, but you really have to get a mindset, a philosophy that this is a process that you are managing, and there's lots of touch points.
Yeah, I like how you said data management is a process, not just a task, right? You know, like you said, a task means it's sort of one and done. You know, you kind of check it off and move on. But when you say it's a process, that requires you know, sort of a care and feeding to it, right? You're constantly checking it, making sure it's working properly. So that's a great point. Um, uh, so let me steer it this way then. You know, when we talk about these processes when it comes to data management, one of the one of the real big unfashionable truths that comes up a lot, and I'm sort of laughing here, is because of the whole idea around artificial intelligence, right? I can't tell you how many times I've heard, well, that's going to solve, it, right? And you know, we just get AI, we get some machine learning going, it's going to help, it's going to automate a lot of this for us, and and obviously, I think we've all seen that that doesn't necessarily work that way. However, it can be a very useful tool. And so I wanted to have you guys explore when we're talking around data management, we you know we understand that it is a process that we have to follow, and there are many facets to it. One of the big things being AI as a way to solve it. What's really the right approach, and you know, and how can we leverage that in a way that's effective and doesn't just become its own um, boondoggle, for lack of a better way of describing it.
Well, I think we talked about this before in the sense that I don't care what the tool is, if the data is not in great shape, you get poor data, you're going to get a poor result. AI doesn't solve that. Now, could AI be aimed at trying to improve the quality of the data? Yeah, I don't know anyone necessarily that's actually using it for that purpose, but yeah, it's an opportunity. But we also talk about AI like it was just a recent invention when this thing has been around for a long, long time. But it keeps having these resurgences and it sort of dies away and then it comes back. The question is, are we on a new high right now and the expectations are unrealistic and it's going to kill it? Or are we finally at a point technology wise that we can start to take some advantage of it? I don't know. I mean, you can go back to the 80s with the expert systems. I mean, we thought that was the answer. It wasn't. The expectations way exceeded what it could do, and it ended up killing it, which is probably a mistake. And we've had another resurgence now with big data because, oh my God, a human being can't handle that much velocity and volume all at the same time. We have to have something else. Well, okay, but if that artificial intelligence can't handle or doesn't recognize bad information, and heaven forbid it's working off the internet because we know that's full of bad information, it's going to have issues. You still need the human being. You still need the processes, as Jim has rightfully put it, to manage the data so that even your AI expectations can be met. And so you're using the tool to its optimal and not dragging it down because you're feeding it bad information.
Yeah, I don't know if the question, Matt, you posed is maybe the right one or not, but maybe I'm just being a bit naive myself. But
Feel free to correct me.
no, I don't know if AI and ML, those are our buddies, sounds like, artificial intelligence and machine learning, are really intended for data management uses in their basic form. I think they're intended more for modeling and for prediction and trying to make discoveries based on data that they use. So that gets back to John's point. The data goes into those and is being used in a predictive or modeling sense for the geologists or engineers or refiners, whoever, to help them solve a particular problem. I think that's a more applicable setting for these technologies. But I admit that, yes, we could probably use them in some way. I do think that we kind of get our language convoluted a bit about when we talk about AI and machine learning, from this context.
Though, if you listen to management consultants and tech vendors and the Amazon, Google, Microsoft, Meta, part of the world, you kind of get you do get the feel that resistance is futile to the AI trend. I'm a Star Trek. I'm a Trekkie, so I can go back to the Borg metaphor. But as John said, I mean, AI is Alan Turing in the 1940s. It's John McCarthy in the 1960s, and Sebastian Thrun in the 2000s. And there's been a number of different pulses of interest in this whole idea of data-driven models, and to go where physics doesn't lead you, to go where statistics can't describe the model, or the volumes or the velocity or the variety kind of types with regard to this. So we've kind of pushed those others aside, and that's wrong. I mean, there's a lot of places physics-based understanding and models are the right way to go. There's a lot of places decline curve analysis, hyperbolic decline curves are the way to go, and we don't need to throw out good tools that still produce good results. But I mean, I read an article by a professor at Rice, and he talked about the remaining gap, and it said don't throw the others away. But it's not the physics. If we know the physics, fine. We've got a process, understanding the process that we can use. But the physics we don't yet know, and he described that as the space for the machine learning sort of algorithms. But even in that, I mean, if you're going to say, okay, machine learning is my way to go, artificial neural networks are my way to go here, we still need to remember data. And it's the idea of how do you train that model in the first place? The whole concept of supervised learning within machine learning kind of algorithms, talks about label, it's almost like history matching of a reservoir characterization approach. You label a bunch of data as this is a cat, this is a dog, and then you set the algorithm on it. So it is trained by you, by the human, by good data. And if you go through that, if you start with a data discovery technique or data profiling or data mucking, whatever, there's a whole bunch of kind of terms for it. But if you begin to understand the data you have, you'll begin to understand data quality issues. You'll begin to understand standards or lack of standards issues. You'll be able to understand, do you have one type of classification or do you have several that you need to break up? Is your data biased? And that's from a statistical perspective. That it's a great cartoon that there's four or five dogs sitting around an executive table, and they're saying, you mean we forgot cats in our data model, right? Well, there was no voice of the cats, within the process. So we've run into these problems in facial recognition algorithms. We've run into these models on algorithms that go all the way from granting loans to letting people out on parole. So, I mean, they have very impactful results. So if the resistance is futile, at least train the damn model with good data, or understand where the data has problems, where we never recorded that type of well before. If we've never built the subsurface based on that lithology before, then there's going to be gaps in the data, and humans have a role of training the model, and then humans have the role of oversight of how the model, and particularly when it comes across examples that we didn't train it on, it hadn't seen before. And that's where the AI tools go off track. And that doesn't mean the technology is necessarily not usable. It just means we didn't think about data from the beginning.
I
Well,
love dogs and cats. I've heard that before.
very true. Well, in listening to what the three of you just said in that, I was kind of making a couple notes here, and there was this idea of making sure we still focus on the data, that we understand that there can be biases, and we've got to make sure we do the right evaluation, and we look at the modeling and all these key words. And what popped in my head was this idea of having like a guiding set of principles, a set of rules that help you, determine how you're going to leverage something like AI as a tool within the overall data management process, which then fundamentally comes back to we need to have the data governance in place, right? And I think again, Jim, something you said too around understanding that it's about the data, but at the same time, there are all these other components that we need to make sure that we're incorporating into the overall data management process. So I know we've been going for a while now. So as one of my other favorite podcasters likes to use the phrase of trying to land the plane. So as we try to land the plane here and kind of finish things up, what are your guys' final thoughts around? Okay, so we know that this is a process. We know data management is a challenge. We know, and we've talked about a number of these unfashionable truths around how we can deal with it. But what is it if a company is struggling to get some sort of data governance or data management, off the ground and up and running? If there's like one key bit of advice you would say, hey, whether they want to hear it or not, this is something you really need to think about doing to help you get started. What would that be?
Well, just to land my part of the plane here, I think data has to have a voice at the table, and The best organizations that I have seen have created their analytics group based on three roles. One, the data scientist who does the fancy programming. Two is a domain expert who knows the problem and understands data, what is right. And the third is the voice of the data, be a data engineer or whatever you want to call them. And that individual is going to help the rest of the whole team by access to trusted data, understanding the quality issues, providing a bit of governance when that is needed across functions or departments or organizations with regard to that. That triangle of roles, and obviously project management and change management and all that are important too. But if you have those three roles on board, I think you're going to go in the right direction.
I love that.
So I like what Jim said. I'm going to bug in just a minute here. I think that if you were to ask me that question, I would turn that question back at you and say, what are you trying to get to? What's your strategy? What are you trying to accomplish here in this corporate environment that you work? Tell me the endpoint. Where are you going to go? And then we'll talk about how the data can help you get there, because the data is the most important thing you own. You own, now you own resources, you have assets, I know that. But you can't make any of those things work together unless you've got good data from all those pieces plugging in. And once I know what the strategy is, then I think there are lots of bright people who can help you design a way to get there based on the data.
Yeah, Tim, you couldn't have said it any better. I mean, and I agree with Jim in terms of the sense that data has to have a seat at the table. This has to be supported at the very top of the organization. But the fact is, to be successful at it, it has to be driven from the bottom. And I think what drives that is exactly what Tim is talking about. You have to have some kind of strategy. You can't fix all of this overnight. You need to focus on what's most important to your company right now. What are you trying to accomplish? Start there and expand out.
Yeah, I was sorry. I was writing down feverishly because I was just taking notes. Because every time I listen to you guys talk, I'm learning something new. I literally could just go pop a bowl of popcorn and just let you guys just talk for another hour, because there's always so much that comes out of this. So I really appreciate this.
Let's don't go overboard here.
You guys are named the three wise guys for a reason. There's a lot of wisdom coming out of this. No, I really appreciate it. Again, I just really appreciate the time you guys have given in just allowing us to throw these questions at you and to allow you guys to just give us your thoughts and sort of off the cuff. So, hey guys, I really appreciate it. As always, the conversation was great. I know we could have had a lot more and gone a lot deeper. For those of you that are listening, we really appreciate that. If you're still here listening at this point, thanks for staying with us this long. We hope that you got some great information out of it as well. Come back and listen to us as we do the next podcast. And as always, leave us some feedback. Let us know what you like. Let us know what you didn't like. Let us know what topics you would like to hear. And as always, if you want more information, please go out to the PPDM website, ppdm.org. You can see our podcast, and there's a whole wealth of information right there at your fingertips. Gentlemen, thank you very much. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Vaya con Dios.